Okay, this is for virtual learning assignment 7B for geometry. It's actually in IXL underneath Algebra 2 though, and it's called J10, solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. So your directions will be to solve by completing the square, and then it says to write your answers as integers, proper or improper fractions in simplest form, or decimals rounded to the nearest hundredth. And that's what I'm going to be using today, are the decimals rounded to the nearest hundredth, unless of course it turns into an integer. Okay, so I have x squared plus 20x plus 19. This is actually factorable, but they want me to solve it by completing the square. So when I'm completing the square, I have 6 different steps up here. My first step is to move your c. You know how we had our ax squared plus bx plus c? So my c is 19, but it's the wrong c. It's not the one that I need to write a perfect square. So I will move it. In this case, I'm going to move a positive 19 by subtracting it from both sides. So I now have x squared plus 20x, and what I'm going to do is leave a blank here for the proper c. And on the right side of the equals, I have 0 minus 19, which is just negative 19. I'm going to leave that same plus the blank space again for the proper c. Now we found our c on the last lesson. We found it in J9, where we found out that our the c was the b divided by 2 squared, right? That was what we're supposed to fill in the last number with. But we also need to find just the plain old b over 2 for completing the square. So my b is the number 20, right? So my b divided by 2 would be 20 divided by 2, which is 10. Okay, I'm going to hold on to that. And then my b divided by 2 squared would be, well, I already found the b divided by 2. It was 10, right? So it's just going to be the 10 squared. And 10 squared gives me 100. Now that 100 is what I'm going to fill in as my proper c. 100 goes here, but whatever I do to one side, I must do the same thing to the other side. Remember on the last video and in the last lesson, I told you that that number, that b divided by 2 squared, always had to be positive. Always ended up as a positive number. So there will always be a plus whatever that number is on both sides of your equal sign. But we have to keep things even. So if I add 100 over here, I need to add 100 to the other side of the equals. Okay, so what this leaves me with, my x plus 20x plus blah, I can't talk. My x squared plus 20x plus 100, right? I'm going to write this as a binomial squared. All right, this is where the completing the square comes from. What I'm actually doing is finding the numbers that add to the middle and multiply to the end. You know, like when we, so our variable is x, so I'm going to put the x here. And then your b over 2, that is where we use this. So the b over 2 that I found right here that I said would come in handy later, this is where we put it. All right, this is always where you put your b over 2. All right, because the number that actually multiplies to 100 and adds to 20 is 10, right? 10 times 10 is 100, and 10 plus 10 is 20. So it's the same thing as if I factored it and I wrote an x plus 10 plus another x plus 10. Because x plus 10 and x plus 10, when I multiply them together, it's like an x plus 10 squared. So this is the whole point of completing the square. What I have written is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, it came from x plus 10 squared. Okay, on the right hand side, we would just go ahead and combine the numbers that we have. So negative 19 plus 100 makes 81. And then our goal is to solve for x. I need to free x. I need to get it all alone. So the first thing I would need to get rid of is the square. So I will take the square root to cancel out the square. I will square root both the left side and the right side because we have to keep things equal. So what I have now is x plus 10, and I have the square root of 81. The square root, whenever we take the square root, we are going to have a plus or minus case, because the square root of 81 could be 9, a positive 9, or it can be a negative 9, because negative 9 times negative 9 is still positive 81, right? So whenever you take the square root, you have a plus or minus. That is key. is we always have to have two answers when we're dealing with quadratics. If it's to the second degree, then I'm going to have two answers. So everything you are doing in this section, in this unit about quadratics, is going to have two answers. And it comes from when we take the square root, we have the plus or minus. It's that same plus or minus that you see when we did the quadratic formula, right? In front of the quadratic formula, there was a plus or minus before the square root, and then your b squared minus 4ac. But back to this. So to get x all alone, I'm going to have to get rid of the plus 10. So I will subtract 10. And that will cancel, and that will leave me with the x all by itself. And what I have on the other side, again, are two answers. I have that negative 10. I have one of the negative 10s is going to go with the plus 9, right? And then I also have x equals negative 10, and I will use the minus 9. Okay, that is where the plus or minus comes in. So the negative 10 did not change. The negative 10 is negative 10 no matter what. There's not like there's a negative 10 and a positive 10. All right, it's both a negative 10, but you have a plus or minus the 9. So you have one with the plus the 9, and you have one with the minus the 9. And your two answers would be negative 10 plus 9 gives me negative 1. And negative 10 minus 9 gives me negative 19. Okay, those are my two solutions to B1.